All right, we'll begin the day with the lead and copper rule. Again, lots of regulations with day one, so that will be module 4. We'll get started with page 4.3. So at the end of this module, what we expect you to be able to do is to at least discuss the lead and copper rule, to define what it is, why do we test for lead and copper, and should we continue to. We're going to look at the regulatory overview of the lead and copper rule. We'll talk about health effects. Are we affected by too much lead, too much copper? What should you expect to see? We'll discuss the sampling methods for lead and copper, the action level for lead and copper. Who knows what the action levels are? Okay, Maureen.
Oh, you want me? Oh, it's 15 parts per million for lead and 1.3 parts per million for copper.
Excellent, excellent. Absolutely. Yes, these are your books. So write in it. If you need highlighters, I have highlighters in the back. We will identify examples of public education. In other words, if you exceed the action level or the maximum contaminant level, we want to make sure that we notify the public. Not only do we want to notify the public, but we want to give them additional tidbits. In some cases, it may be where to go to have your water checked, or you may want to seek a physician or what have you, or you may want to make sure you flush the water for so many minutes prior to using it first thing in the morning. So we want to make sure that we're passing that information along to the public, and then we will discuss various lead and copper treatment options that may be available. All right, as far as the regulatory overview, in the past we used a lot of lead, the lead service line, a lot of copper lines in the past because it was cheap, inexpensive, and readily available. Over the years, however, we start to discover that, hey, there may be some issue. As water is sitting within these pipes for a long period of time, there may be some leaching out into the drinking water. And so then you start to look at what are the ramifications of excessive amount of lead and copper in the drinking water. Does it affect individual? And because of that, and those types of scenarios and research, they came up with that there is some exposure hazards to lead and copper. As far as lead exposure, the primary cause for developmental problem in children was attributed to excessive amount of lead. And at one time, lead was put into everything, even into paints and things like that. And so a long time, especially in the 70s, they used to say don't let your children eat the paint chip and things like that because of the lead. Copper effects in your drinking water, it increases the effects from other contaminants such as nitrites and nitrates. Now, what do we mean by that? Copper, the exposure to lead and copper, increases the effects from other contaminants, primarily nitrite and nitrates. Why are we concerned with nitrites and nitrates? They're dangerous. Why? What do we put in our fertilizer? Nitrates. Yeah, it's a preservative. Absolutely. So, if you have a lot of nitrates in your drinking water, the very young are susceptible, children. Because your body prefers nitrates over oxygen. And in order for our red blood cells to develop, we need what? Oxygen. With no oxygen, that's when we have those diseases such as sickle cell because of the cells, don't have the oxygen content. Well, nitrites, as I said, the red blood cell prefer that over oxygen. So with the very young children under 6 months of age, they're getting all of that in their bodies, and it literally suffocates them. So excessive amount of nitrates causes the blue baby syndrome because literally they suffocate because there's no oxygen there. And so when you have lots of lead and copper, then that's going to magnify that nitrate. And so that's not a good thing there. And if you will, just talk a little louder for me. What was that, Linda?
I said Tommy told us about the blue baby syndrome.
Okay, Tommy? She said you taught them about the blue baby syndrome?
I might have mentioned it.
Okay.
What
Very
is,
good.
what is it
But I see it on the,
that causes it to, what, it become worse? Is that what it is?
What the copper and the lead in the water causes elevated levels of the nitrate.
Oh, it's
It
raised.
magnifies
It's
it.
magnified in nitrate
Right,
level,
in the
not
nitrate.
lead and copper.
Right, excellent, excellent. And it's almost like carbon monoxide. If carbon monoxide, which has the same density as oxygen, was in this room right now, our body prefers that over the oxygen, and we literally can suffocate. Same density, our body will take that in and die because of the lack of oxygen, although we have oxygen in the room. It's the same thing with the nitrates. Your blood cells will prefer that or will take that in over the oxygen that's present, and literally you suffocate. And that's why it's called blue baby, because of the color. So the purpose of the lead and copper rule was to minimize exposure to these contaminants that may be present in the water, in the lead and copper, and to minimize the effect from drinking the water. In 1991, EPA promulgated the maximum contaminant level goals. What's the difference in a goal and a limit?
The goal cannot be enforced.
Okay, the goals are not enforceable. The goals is that the most possible that you can be exposed to, and there are no ill health effects associated with it. So that's the goal. Then they set limits as close as possible to the goal. You cannot exceed the limits, the maximum contaminant level limits. They are enforceable. Goals are not enforceable. Okay. 2007, there were minor revisions to the lead and copper rule. Okay. Goals, again, provides maximum health protection from lead and copper. EPA established requirements were for community water systems as well as non-community water systems. A community water system is one that has at least 15 service connections or serves 25 individuals for at least a year-round basis or 365 days. Non-community or non-transient non-community water systems, we're still looking at least 15 service connection or 25 individual, but now we're looking at a 6-month period of time. So that would be the difference. So examples of a community would be a residential area, a mud district would be a community, one that you are providing piped water for human consumption year-round. Examples of non-transient, non-community systems would be your daycares, your factories. You have 25 of the same individual, that come and go on a daily basis here for at least the 6 months out of the year. And with your non-community systems, we're looking at putting into place optimization for corrosion and periodic sampling. All right, some of the health effects from lead and copper exposure. Again, for infants and young children, blue baby syndrome. Again, there's magnification of nitrite ingestion when there is a presence of copper in your drinking water. Other health effects will be gastrointestinal effects. It can be anything from stomach cramps, stomach aches, to diarrhea, to very, very severe reaction to it. In adults, we see the same type of gastrointestinal effects from overexposure to copper. Lead, the list is longer. And as Lori pointed out, the maximum contaminant level for lead is 0.015 parts per million. For copper, it was 1.3 parts per million. So the smaller the maximum contaminant level limit is, that particular contaminant is
But we don't have
probably
an
more
MCL
potent.
for copper, we have an action number.
No, you actually have an MCL for copper. At least EPA does.
Because that keeps saying we don't have one, we have an action number.
Okay.
And the state
And
doesn't
maybe,
have an MCL on the test either.
maybe, and I'll have to defer back to the state agency. Maybe they're looking or using action level and MCL interchangeably. I'm not sure if that's what's happening. But when you look at the EPA rates, 1.3 parts per million is the MCL. It's on your primary drinking water standard.
1.3 what?
1.3 milligrams per liter, parts per million. Very good. Mhm. For copper. Right, Lori?
Yes.
What is it
Confirm.
again?
1.3. And it's actually in your book. When we get there, you can highlight it because we do have that information in the
1.3
book.
million for which one, copper?
For copper, parts per million.
That's enforceable.
Huh?
That's enforceable.
1.3 million for copper.
Parts per
If that's
million.
an MCL, then that would be enforceable. That's not an MCL because it's an action level. Because you have to have 90 percentile. So they're not in violation for serving water that's 1.3, they're in violation if the 90
If it's-
percentile is over.
Absolutely.
So that
So
would not
we
be an
would-
MCL.
The way EPA looks at it, it is MCL. If you look on the standards, primary standards,
Page is it on?
what page is it on? No, I haven't gotten to it yet, but we can find it right here. Da-da-da.
Danny brought it up.
Well, it
Yes.
just keeps going into my head, so
Yeah, it's classified as action level for
maybe the state's different. Hey, Sharon, Richard Thorpe.
I saw what you wrote.
They want your bones in the parking lot.
I heard of that.
It's on page.
On 421, it says action level, but that's, I'm looking for, and I know when we get to the chemical contaminants, maybe in the next module, where it will list the MCL. So when we get to the next module, I actually have the guideline, so you'll see it here too.
Yeah, it says action level in it's under MTL classification, but it says action level.
Action level, you're on 5.7 for that
Yeah.
one?
It does say action level.
5.4.
5.7. It's the drinking water regulation.
This says 4.9. It says action level.
Action level 3, 1.3.
1.3.
You're
All right.
teaching the state now.
Huh?
You're teaching the state now.
Yes, yes. All right, for lead, the health effects, in your infants and young children, low birth weight, slowdown of physical, mental development, damage with your hearing, reduction attention span, as well as poor classroom
Got all
performance.
those.
I just have a
Uh-huh.
question. Do we have training next week? Here?
Yeah.
Just today and tomorrow.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sussex
That's
County
okay.
is next week. Joe Biden.
Yeah, they, again, attributed to quite a lot of different things.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And for adults, kidney damage, increased blood pressure, as well as damage to the reproductive system. So all of those are areas of major concern, and we need to make sure that we are doing what we do to put forth a water that is within limits. Now, every report must include a short informational statement when you've exceeded it to your customers. In other words, you should say infants and young children are typically more vulnerable to lead in drinking water than the general population. More elevated levels of lead can cause serious health problems, especially for pregnant women and young children, and that it may be from individual plumbing and not so much from the distribution system. You want to let people know that. You want to also educate your public to minimize the potential for lead exposure by flushing the tap at 30 seconds to 2 minutes. Generally, we would say until there is a change in the temperature of water. That way, you know you've removed all the stagnant water that's been sitting there all night. And if the public is concerned about the levels, have their water tested and give them the information where they can go to get it tested. And they can also call the Safe Drinking Water Hotline. Now, it's possible that your home levels may be higher than others in the community. It goes back to what's in your individual plumbing here. Now, with the state primacy agency approval, the system can write their own educational statement. They just have to make sure that they get it approved through the state prior to making that leap. So, sampling for lead and copper. We're going to go over specific instruction for sampling and testing, and we'll cover the selection of your sample point, collection of sample, analyzing the samples, as well as getting the information on data gathered here. Now, as far as selection of sample point, yes, ma'am.
Just before we go, we might be talking about letting it run for 30 seconds to 2 minutes. What about the beach houses? Will they get sick or go too long?
Okay, again, the question, and I'll be repeating the questions just in case if it was not heard. The question was, for a typical home that probably is using the water every day, letting it run for the 30 seconds, 2 minutes may be okay. But what about for beach homes that go months on end without any type of movement of the water? But here again, you will turn it on until there is a temperature change. You know at that point that you're now drawing from the main, and that you've removed all the water that may be stagnant in the lines. So
Most
same
of your
thing.
beaches is, or PVC, it's not copper, but
So they're fairly new, newer homes and things like that.
Just the environment, copper, the kind of maybe doesn't last too long.
Here, okay,
Yeah,
so as a rule of thumb, you all don't.
Yeah, I don't think you.
Delaware is real bad in copper.
Yeah.
Okay.
You got bad ones.
And you're
And
not
see,
gonna have
in
to
Texas, we still have quite a lot of copper.
Yeah.
But we're moving to the PVC or sort of plastic tubing type.
On this section of sample points, they've got a mobile home park. What would make you go test someone's trailer that you know they got copper pipes in? Because when you get the letter, it tells everybody that they've got lead in their water. It's not specific, so everybody goes into a panic. So you know where those old trailers are that you really don't want to take a test with. So what drives them to get a sample for those?
It's not always the old ones now. A lot of the newer ones, or especially mobile homes, this is the cheaper faucets that we put in.
Oh, so now we're having problems with the faucets.
It's mostly the faucets where you get the readings from. It's not the.
It's not the problem.
It's not the,
Because a lot of the newer homes have the.
So it's the lead that's the problem in the spigot, it's not copper, because most of the spigots aren't copper, right?
Here is what I'm hearing
It's
Bill to
brass
say.
stuff.
Oh, it's brass, so it's
Brass.
copper.
Okay.
So what's the-
So why, your question was why go to those places we know?
Well,
they're
what,
hot?
no, you only go there if you're forced to go there. If you knew it
Do
would
we,
be an issue.
yeah, do we want to go there because we know it's an issue? We're the champions of the environment.
No,
I mean,
the park
that's-
owner.
We're the champion of the environment. And we want to make sure, you know, because they may not be aware. So you want to make sure when you're getting your sampling points, you have representation of all. And usually there are 3 tiers that we're looking at. You want to make sure you have good representation for those 3 tiers of sampling sites. 2 of them deals with single residents. Prior to the 1982, after the
What's the single
1983.
residence?
single one tap into a home, where you got multiple residential
Oh, like
area,
apartment
or an
house.
apartment, single family home, yes. So again,
But there's nothing that
that
drives
drives the
in the, there's
stipulation.
nothing that drives in the test every home in their community over a couple of years.
No.
They
No.
still can select the ones they wanna go to.
Right, but being the champion of the environment, and being that we want to make sure
That's
that,
so much criteria.
the louder deal.
I was saying, they have to meet the criteria of where they sample.
Right, and that's
So-
what I talked about on the 3 tiers, we'll talk
Right.
about it in more detail. So you can't pick and choose like that, I know this is gonna be a hot spot
Yeah.
and stand away from it. No, we wanna make sure we have representation, so we can find the problem, so they can be corrected, issues can be corrected. Okay, so what dictates the number of samples we're going to pull will be the population or the size of the system served. Okay, that will be the driving point as far as how many samples. And you have this one in your module there, or in your book there, as far as the standard monitoring requirements. Again, you have your large size systems for under, this should be greater than 100,000. You're looking at 100 samples. We're geared toward the small systems here as far as this delivery. So for less than 101 population, you're looking at least 5 sample sites for lead and copper, and we're gonna do water quality parameter on at least one site for water quality parameter. The water quality parameters would be those things such as running pH, conductivity, orthophosphate, silica, those parameters that we're interested in that can also affect corrosivity of the water. For 101 to 500, we're looking at least 10 sampling sites. 501 to 3,300, and at least 20 sampling sites initially. We want to make sure, again, well representative based on the tiers that we're going to talk about today. But that's the number of samples. For reduced monitoring, now how can I get on the reduced monitoring? Because I'm almost cutting my sample sites in half for at least 2 of the population size that we're concerned with. So what do I need to do in order to be a part of the reduced monitoring? Gotta make sure that I'm underneath at least the action level or maximum contaminant level. And again, that I can demonstrate this is not an issue. And then I can put on that reduced. So with reduced monitoring requirement, less than 100, it stays the same because the EPA says you gotta have a minimum of 5 sampling sites. For 101 to 5, you can be reduced down to 5, and for 501 to 3,300, 10.
And how do you qualify for reduced monitoring? You have to have a first round of
Your first
10
round,
samples or whatever,
yeah, all clean.
all clean.
2 consecutive.
And that's the one thing with that we'll,
Okay.
point out, yes. All right, short-term revisions to the lead and copper rule as far as your sampling sites must be from taps for human consumption. In other words, we want to make sure that we're not going to the outside faucet, but actually where, people are utilizing the water from. So generally, this is the bathroom or the kitchen tap. Systems with fewer than 5 taps must sample all taps at least once and take the repeat samples on different days until you get a total of 5. And your primacy agency have the discretion to allow systems with less or fewer than 5 taps to collect 1 sample from each tap that can be used for human consumption. But this is something that you have to talk with the primacy agents in order to get that approved.
Are you saying that somewhere that only has like 5 units?
There are some
Or
places,
you're saying
again,
that
I just left the Virgin Island, whereas they had
Oh, that's
one sample site, and that was it. And you have the 5. But EPA requires a minimum of 5. And so again, that's where the discretion falls on the state.
5 taps in one place, in one person's home.
No.
No,
And the
in the
distribution
system.
system.
System,
So
we're
five,
talking
yeah.
system.
Okay.
Public water system. Community water systems or your non-community, non-transient, non-community water system. Remember, That's what lead and copper is applicable to. So not individual homes. Although in the islands, most of their systems, in some cases, were just individual homes because it was all rain capture with the one low sample. All right, other short-term revisions, systems with fewer than 5 samples are required to use the highest test result at the 90th percentile level. It also allows for reduction to lead and copper sampling frequency to once per year, but it requires that the system collect at least 1 sample per tap that can be used for human consumption. Also, there is language in there to reduce it to once for every 3 years. EPA allows systems to collect fewer than 5 samples, but at least 1 sample per tap that can be used for human consumption. So it all goes back to, again, and this probably is more for the non-transient, non-community systems there. All right, types of sampling sites. Your sites must be approved in writing by the primacy agents. So in other words, you can't just go pick and choose on this house, this house, this house. No, what's the criteria? I'm going to look at the 3 tiers of sampling. Tier 1, single-family structures that contain copper pipes with lead solder installed after 1982 and may be serviced by a lead service line. Tier 2, buildings and multi-family structures that contain copper pipes installed after 1982 and or served by your lead service line. And Tier 3, I have single-family structures that contain the copper pipe, lead and solder installed prior to 1983. So representative samples, those are my 3 tiers for sampling. For non-transient, non-community system, I can only use Tier 1 and Tier 2. So again, single-family structures after 1982 or prior to 1983.
So if they don't have copper pipes, they don't have to do it?
Repeat the question. If they don't have copper pipes,
They don't have to do it?
they don't have to do it.
They
Everybody,
do tier 1 if they don't have copper pipes, right?
if they don't have copper pipes, but you may still have lead and copper rulers together.
Oh, okay, it's just saying copper, but it means copper, not lead.
Yeah, well, yes, because you see there,
What,
the
You go
solar
back,
and
you go back
flux.
one,
Mm-hmm.
go back one screen.
One more? Okay.
No, I guess that was good. 080 that contain copper pipes with lead solder.
Yes. So you still got that component there.
So, but see, it screws everything up to me when you add the copper pipes with lead solder. So if all you have is 2 bathroom sinks that have lead in them, to me it says I don't have to do that.
All right, primacy agency, what's your take on it?
You target the tier 1 sites. You try to identify all of those. If you don't have tier 1, then you move to tier 2. Now, tier 1, the single family detached structures prior to 82, a lot of them were built with copper. The issue here in Delaware is a lot of homes do not use copper because we have very corrosive water. They use PVC. But they still may have brass fixtures that would have lead in it as part of the brass that leaches out. That's where we look at it. So if the system does not have any homes with copper pipe, mobile home parks, they typically
Right,
are
and that was
plastic.
brought up earlier.
Yeah, then you just pick 5 homes that are willing to collect the samples for you. I mean, if you don't have the sites, you don't have them, so then you identify what you
You
can.
still have to do the analysis.
Right, you still have to pick your minimum of 5, 10, 20 samples that you have to do. And you just, if you don't have those tiers, then you document that you don't have them. And for a little while, we were able to waive sampling.
Okay.
Texas was instrumental in getting that with the initial lead copper rule.
Right.
Region 6 gave Texas that, well, if it's a mobile home park, doesn't have any sources of lead or copper, then waive them permanently.
Yeah.
Until the minor revisions, EPA said, no, we don't like that. But
Right. And,
But,
and
yeah,
really
but
the way they look on that now as far as the waives or the exemptions and things like that, will give you longer time, but you still have to comply. You still have to prove.
Right, so there is still the minimum monitoring now, and I think now you go to what, once every 6 or 9 years, depending
Right, up to
on.
9 years for
Up to
some
9 years.
monitors.
But,
So that's
yeah, but
pretty
you
good.
still have to document that you don't have any sources of lead and copper in your distribution and or source water. We don't have it in our source water in Delaware, but I still get a blue-green stain. I got plastic pipes in my home, and if I get a little drip in the bathroom faucet, I'll get that blue-green stain, because you still have 12 inches of copper coming off your water heater.
So does that answer your question, King Richard?
Well, when it says copper pipes with lead solder, it's being too specific. It should be a little more general to give you
And here's a
flexibility.
regulatory agency talking about another regulatory agency language.
Sorry.
No, that's good.
But when
That's
someone
good.
reads that and says, hey, I don't have copper pipes with lead solder, so I'm done.
Yeah.
That's what it tells me, as being
No,
someone from
they
outside.
should
that's
read
not
that and
good
say, I don't have
information.
copper pipes with lead soldering, so I moved to tier 2.
So tier two.
Which is the multi-family.
Tier 2 is
there.
multi-living facility, it's not a single wide trailer.
Then move to tier 3.
What's tier 3 is?
Is after or prior to 1980.
And then if all else fails,
You
Back to
still
got
have
five
to send us a
sites.
sampling size.
There's no copper pipes in it.
But the rule says you will sample, so you will identify
Absolutely.
sites at some
Okay, but
point.
somewhere here it's gonna say you will still do some
There's
tests.
minimum sampling requirements, yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I mean, you do what it tells you to do.
And
my
then, and when the rule
interpretation-
comes up for revision or what have you, you wanna make sure that you're submitting your comments.
Yeah.
And your concerns. That's how you're
Well,
heard.
if I was a mobile home park owner or a housing owner, you know, there's some things that affect that.
Right.
See, if I can figure out how they're trying to get away with it, then we can get around it.
All right, 50% of your sample collected during each monitoring period must be in sites that contain lead pipes, copper pipes, and 50% served by lead service line. Now, collecting the samples, you gotta use an approved method for collecting samples. If you don't have people that are trained to collect these samples, the rule does give some leeway for your homeowners or the residents to collect the samples. You cannot come back at the end of the testing period, everything failed, and you cannot come back and say, well, I had a residence testing it, and because of that, they screwed my sample up, give me a reprieve. No. So you want to make sure that you are going through the process. I would have something in writing as to what they need to do for pulling these samples. Okay? Because you can't use that in the end as a reason for your challenge. We want to make sure, again, following the approved procedures, tell the residents, or you make sure you have someone pull the first draw sample. In other words, we want the water to stay at least motionless at least 6 hours or more than 18 hours, because we want to see if any of the copper and lead is actually reaching out into the drinking water. So we want the first draw. Usually they're given a liter container. Generally, if we're allowing the public to collect, we don't put the preservative in it because of the hazards associated. Well, the rule or reg gives us the right to acidify it after collection. Also, tell them to collect it from the cold water tap or the bathroom sink tap. Cold water tap, not the hot water. Samples may be acidified up to 14 days after collection. And again, the system may not challenge results if the residents are allowed to pull the samples. I'm not sure in Delaware, do you allow the residents to pull samples?
Yeah.
We do also.
Can I ask a question?
You sure
Is
can.
that when they put the little bottles out on the sidewalk and fill them up?
No, that's a treatment company looking for business.
That's what now?
That's a treatment company looking for business. That's not.
And the
So-
treatment company, the question was, are those the same little bottles they put out and asked you to collect? And he said,
They
treatment
use a
company.
32-ounce bottle.
I mean, I've never did a lead sample, but I know when I lived in Roaring Grant, certain, every now and then you'll have the little bottles in and they'll tell you to pull it early.
If you are an approved site for collecting lead and copper, the utility or the district or the system would have personally contacted you in order to pull those samples. So no bottles will just show up and, hey, do this. No, they'll get your approval prior to that, prior to even submitting that list to the state. That should be done. Okay. All right, collect at the tap, for collecting your lead service line, because we said not only are we doing the first straw, but we also want to know what's coming off of those lead service lines. So sample collection will be a little different. This time we want them to flush. We want them to flush so we can get the actual water from the lead service line. So collect after flushing the volume of water between the tap and the lead service line. So you'll give them some direction how long to let the water run if they're pulling the sample for you. You don't have the wrong people. Prior to collecting that sample. Or as a utility, they can tap directly into the lead service line, so you don't have to deal with residents on this one. Single-family residents allow the water to run until, again, significant change in temperature. Now we know that we got the water coming from the main. For your small and medium system exceeding the action level, you must monitor the following at the taps and entry points to the distribution system. These are those water quality parameters that we were talking about earlier. pH, alkalinity, orthophosphates, or silica if they're applicable. In other words, if inhibitors are used. Calcium conductivity as well as water temperature. And you gotta have at least a minimum of one cycle for this. Question, Linda? No. Now, to qualify for reduced monitoring, Lori was pointing this out, you gotta be below the action level for the previous 2 6-month periods. So you have to demonstrate this is the norm. This is my baseline. I don't have a hit consecutively. And you must include those parameters for the water quality parameters, the pH, the conductivity, the orthorophosphate, the silica, the temperature. All of those must be part of it also. All right, initial monitoring period after installation of corrosion control and after the state specifies parameter value for optimum control. This is the frequency that you can adhere to. So initially, we're doing the water quality parameters. Again, this is at the taps and at the entry points to the distribution system, and that should continue every 6 months. After installation of corrosion control, pH, alkalinity, orthorophosphate, silica applicable at your taps every 6 months. pH, alkalinity, dosage rate and concentration, if it's adjusted as a part of controlling the corrosion, and the inhibitor dosage rate and the inhibitor residual you may be using at the entry point to the distribution system. And again, you're looking at that on almost every 2 weeks, if not more often. If and when the state specifies parameter values for optimum control, corrosion control, again, same frequency here every 6 months, dose rate and all of that of your inhibitors no less frequently than 2 weeks. And a lot of systems will probably do it a little more often. For reduced monitoring, if we're on this game plan here, every 6 months annually, or it can be every 3 years, you may be given a reduced number of sites. And what we'll see when we start looking at the chemical contaminants, depending on what's in your system, that can be even reduced even longer, up to 9 years. We use the approved method to collect the sample. You have to use an approved method to run the analysis. Not every entity can run lead and copper. In order to run lead and copper, it must be an approved, certified laboratory. So generally, your state will have your own laboratory running, or at a lab that's NELAC certified, but it must be a certified lab to run the lead and copper. Any other laboratory can run these other water quality parameters as long as they are using approved methods.
What's NELAC?
NELACS is the national accreditation for a laboratory that's out there now, all up under the EPA umbrella. Yeah. If you NELACS certified, that means you jump through a lot of hoops to get there, a lot of administration, paperwork, doing additional sampling and all of that you have to do in order to get that certification. So that's the national accreditation, certification for laboratories.
For the water quality parameters, you said that can it be done in the field?
Can it be done in the field? Some of those parameters, there may be field kits that are out there, but the deal with, and she asked, can it be done in the field? If it is an approved method, I know Hawk has a lot of different kits that are on the market. You have to be careful with those kits, and they will let you know whether or not that method is EPA approved. If it is an EPA approved method, yes, it can be conducted in the field. But you want to make sure that you're referring back to whatever kits you have to ensure that it is EPA, and usually they'll have a little tag on there when it is EPA approved. Yes, sir?
Some of those have to be done in the field. pH has a holding time of 15
Right.
minutes. You're not going to get it to the lab. Conductivity, I think, is similar. And temperature, of course, you have to do. Now, you have to have a certified thermometer. I think it's going to be official. I'm not sure if they require that on the field testing. But I know for our refrigerators, we have to maintain certified thermometers that get NIST certified and all that fun stuff. So.
Excellent.
Well,
So what, go ahead.
My whole point was, environment. Are they,
For a pH test, if their person was on site collecting the sample and did a pH, we would accept that. But yeah, they're not certified for lead or copper.
And for the pH, whatever group you're talking about, if they're doing the pH and things like that, they probably have a meter that is
Right.
EPA approved.
Yeah, we have
Because
our
that's on the
meters are,
stipulation.
you know, because we accept it when our staff do the pH readings in the field when they collect samples, so we would accept it from a lab like EnviroCorp that's not currently certified for the other parameters.
Good question. All right, reporting requirements. Now, you must report within the first 10 days following the end of each applicable monitoring period. You have how long to report the results?
10 days.
You have how long to report your results?
10 days.
10 days. Oh, what did you say? Okay.
Yeah, that long.
You have how long to report? 10 days. That's the end of the monitoring period. 10 days. I didn't get the question. Now you get it.
So just remember the 4 minutes.
So, and then your monitoring periods, remember, can be every 6 months, it can be annually, it can be every 3 years, or even 9 years. The 90th percentile lead and copper concentration measured from among all the lead and copper tests. Results of the samples collected at the entry points, all of this is part of the reporting, as well as the water quality parameters during the 6-month period. All of that must be reported. Now, before you go out there and start changing things, putting in new things, changing chemicals and things like that, you want to make sure that you get state approval. Okay. Any addition or new source got to be approved by the state. Long-term changes in treatment. If you're just changing the dosage or the chemicals, you need to make sure you're contacting your privacy agency. Modifying or modification to the existing treatment, you got to notify the state. You just can't go all willy-nilly and do what you want to do out there. Then they show up for inspection and it's like, oh, I needed to notify you on that. This is giving me better results. No, before you make those modification changes, notify the state. Even if it's just a matter of going from free chlorine to chloramine, you gotta notify, get that stamp of approval. Switching coagulants, going from the ferrets to alum or something. I gotta know, and not only do I notify the state, I should be running my pilot studies before making such drastic changes. Shouldn't be just based on, let's say I have someone come and tell me this is the latest, the greatest. Back it up, let's do a study using my water source. And switching corrosion inhibitor product notification to the state. Other reporting requirements, source water monitoring. Again, results are due within the 10 days after the applicable monitoring period. Failure to collect from specified sites must be accompanied with the explanation why the sampling point changed. So if I turn into the state, again, a good sampling siting plan, and I choose to do another site or go another place, I better have an explanation. I shouldn't do it without, again, their approval. For corrosion control treatment reporting, we're going to include in here recommendation for optimizing corrosion control, demonstration of that optimization, in other words, doable pilot studies and all, as well as the data evaluating the effectiveness of what you're doing, whether or not it's a sequestering agent that you're adding and all of that. And then a letter certifying the system has completed installing whatever treatment that they've told the state that they're wanting to do.
What's involved in a pilot study? Can you just take a water sample and add some chemicals to it and see what your pH comes up to, or?
No, with the pilot study, again, I want to make sure I have my controls as well as the changes that I'm making, and I'm going to look at that over time.
But you're
So
putting
it's
in the
not
actual
just a
water
run.
system and then run it for a while and see how it does?
I'm
Or
gonna
you
set up
just-
sort of like a little modified system. And then after that is
Oh,
where
you're
I
not,
want
you're not
it to
putting it to
be.
the public yet, you're
Right.
doing a side stream for that.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Right.
Once I get it straight over here and get the approval, then I go to the next step here. I'm introducing
It looks
to the
like it's
system.
working, so try it.
You don't ever want to just start putting it into the public system without all that backup and documentation, as well as approval. Okay? So just to say that I've done it over here and it worked well, and now I'm going to start, but I don't have anything to show for it, not written down, no ramification that happened, all of that.
So you'd have to take some more
Big
dozen
trouble.
samples of that water and have it
Big,
tested.
big trouble. Yeah, it can be extensive and as well as expensive, but in the long run, it may work out for you better. All right, source water treatment, the recommendation regarding source water, if your source of water is an issue, as well again, a letter to the state certifying the system has completed installing the treatment designated by the state within a 24-month period. Now, as far as lead service line replacement reporting, systems exceeding the action level no later than 12 months after the end of the monitoring period must demonstrate in writing to the state again that it's conducted the material evaluation, in other words, it's done the studies, it has identified the initial number of lead service line in the distribution system, and now you're ready to start with your mandate, and their mandate is that you need to change out, replace at least 7% of the initial number of lead service line on an annual basis. All of those requirements, if that's your problem, you gotta get it good for doing it. I've got to certify and show them, demonstrate to them that as a system, we are doing that.
When you do a pilot study, would that be with an engineering firm? Because that's probably something you wouldn't do on your own, would you have an engineer come in and do it, or?
Whenever I get ready to submit anything to the state,
Yeah.
you're gonna have to back it up with an engineer. Let me just put
Well, I
it
think
like
we
that.
tell them what to do, right, Bill, you decide what they need, no?
You let them have their own,
We use EPA guidance
Okay.
to determine,
Because you usually discuss on what they, no? Okay.
all right, if your system exceeded the action level no later than 12 months, again, conduct your sampling and demonstrate the concentration in all your service line is equal to or less than the 0.015 milligrams per liter. Lori mentioned the 15 parts per billion. That's just another way of looking at that number where it's in a whole number as opposed to not. Same thing though. All right, what are we going to do as far as educating the public? Again, there's an exceedance of the lead or copper. There's an issue in the 90th percentile. Now we need to alert the public. We're going to provide a list of newspaper, radio station, television, facility. We're going to provide all that to the state where we're doing the initial education. Additional monitoring data reporting must be included. In other words, if we're pulling extra samples, and if they were pulled in the approved method, and they were run by an approved laboratory, even though they're just extra, because I know some systems we just like to pull extra, you got to report it. So when you start pulling all these extra samples by an approved method, you must report the results. We're going to report the 90th percentile, and again, make sure that you keep good records. If it's not written, it wasn't done. All record retention for lead and copper must be retained for a minimum of 12 years. All records must be retained for how long? 12 years. All records must be retained for how long? 12 years. And I always tell my systems, don't ever throw anything away. Have some backup to your backup. 50 years in the future. Because you just never know. But the minimum is 12 years. Action level for lead, 0.015 milligrams per liter, 15 micrograms per liter of parts per billion if you prefer. What do you all typically use here? Because she said part per billion. That's what you typically record, Lauren?
I just said it because it's kind of easier to see, like you said, the whole number. But
Okay.
yeah, I mean, it is typically parts per million.
Okay. And the micrograms per liter is the same equivalency there. I just want to make sure that we're not getting confused because we're using all these different units. Copper, 1.3, and when levels are exceeding at the 90th percentile sample, you need to now, again, start with your water quality parameter collection there. We're going to do the entry point collection 6 months prior to corrosion control and 2 weeks after, every 2 weeks after. Reduce sampling if the parameters are met for 6 consecutive monitoring period for 2 of those annually, and reduce sampling if parameters are met for 3 annual monitoring periods. Then they go to triannually once every 3 years. We've noticed the water quality parameters before. These are the parameters that should be monitored. Now, what do we do if we need to go ahead and do some corrosion control? Okay, as far as corrosion control treatment, it must be completed by all large systems. Okay. However, small and medium systems are only required by the state if the state require them. And again, they are also given 18 months to complete the study. Systems will have 24 months to install whatever treatment they need or deem necessary. Again, you must perform 2 consecutive 6 months monitoring of your tap and your water quality parameters. Small systems may stop the corrosion control program if the system is less than or equal to the action level for 2 consecutive monitoring periods. All right, we're also going to go ahead and start source monitoring when the action levels are exceeded. 1 set of sample for each entry point to the distribution system is required within 6 months of the first action level exceedance. And you have 24 months to implement any required source water treatment. For groundwater, our time span is once every 3 years. For surface water, it's on an annual basis. And however, as in all parts of the group, there's always that language there for reduced monitoring. All right, public education. The content of what you submit to the public must be written. what we're going to tell the public, the health effects of lead, we talked about that earlier, sources of the lead, tell them how to get their water tested. You want to make sure that you're going above and beyond. Good faith effort is the way the language is, make a good faith effort. Posted in places that are frequented by women and children. Notify the customers where you pull the sample if theirs were actually higher. Okay, we're going to let them know about the replacement of the lead service line and try to notify them before you start doing that type of work as a system, because when you start doing it, then they'll probably see even a higher level or an increase. So they suggest notifying customers 45 days prior to replacement. Okay, perform your corrosion study as one of the compliance options. Add orthophosphate or silica-based chemicals. This is probably the easiest option to implement. All it is sort of like a sequestering agent for the corrosion. You can also add alkalinity-based chemicals such as lime, soda ash, caustic soda. What it does is raises the pH. And when the pH is raised up, then you don't have the activity that goes along with forming the corrosive properties there. Okay. You can also use your various stability index tests that are out there, like the Langmuir's, the Baylis curve, in order to continuously check on the stability of the water. With the Baylis curve, very, very easy for any operator to operate, because all you need to know is a pH and an alkalinity. And based on that pH and alkalinity, you see where you fall on that curve. It will tell you right away whether or not your water is corrosive or stale. So very, very simple tool for most operators to utilize.
So the orthophosphate is just protecting the water line from being attacked by the corrosive nature of the water, right?
And it also sequesters.
So, but you're still gonna be drinking it, but it's not gonna, be in it because it's still on the line, it's protecting the line, see? So sequester is just keeping it where it's at, you're not really drinking it.
So now we protected the property of our consumer.
Yeah. And because when you say sequester, it makes me think, well, it's still in the water you're drinking. You know,
If it's an iron issue,
and it's sequestered.
if it's an iron issue with corrosive water, and it's just iron. Iron, again, does not fall on the primary standards as being health issues. So now we've saved you, and I'm being facetious, we've saved you the trip to the doctor and paying for the actual iron tablet that you
But
need to
I have a problem with iron when it gets up to 16 milligrams per liter. Is that still safe and healthy? Is that the
Don't
wrong
know,
question?
that's something where I will then ask you to check with your physician.
Okay.
Yeah, and generally, we don't see levels like that.
We got real bad on it in Southern California.
Really? Is it because of the pipes, or is it just naturally?
It's natural.
occurring? Yeah, so you all do things in order to remove it, to protect the consumer.
But it's still
property.
considered just a secondary issue.
Yeah, and with your secondary issues, it's like the maximum contaminant level goals. Those are those aesthetic things that, again, we want to provide the consumer with something that is aesthetically pleasing. But if it's not a health issue, how much money do we put into something like that? All right, are there any questions, concerns, or issues from lead and copper? Additional comments? No. None?
Who has to report the water quality parameters every 2 weeks? What would trigger that, and when can you stop that?
When can you stop that? Again, it goes back to the system. They're the ones that's responsible for making sure all the samples are pulled and so forth. You stop it after you have demonstrated, again, that we're within parameters, because what triggers that is that exceedance there. When you're over that 90th percentile, that's when you have to start doing that extra higher frequency and doing the water quality parameter, especially if you're utilizing the orthophosphate and the silica based products there.
So the 2 good rants, and then they can stop the water quality parameters.
After that, then I'm gonna call my state agency and say, hey, look, these are my results. Because the key is, you have to make sure that you're able to demonstrate that it's no longer an issue. And so once, I have to have, and get it in writing. I know you all are not systems, but make sure you get it in writing from your state agency. I can't just notify them, I need to make sure that it is in writing prior to stopping any type of monitoring that I am now, that I've been putting out.
So once you do corrosion control, once you install it, you're gonna have to keep monitoring it, for pH or whatever, so that you'll never stop that.
In your own state, you never stop it, you
Yeah,
don't have
that's
to
every day.
demonstrate.
Right, because if you go out of your set limits, you set a limit for optimum, your optimum
Corrosion.
water quality parameters, you optimize them. If they're out of that limit for 9 days out of the month, then they violate. So you can't stop it from.
But that's what, because we get into an issue between the small and medium systems and then the large systems, because the large systems.
They have to, but with the
Right.
small and medium, a lot of times you have that flexibility, and that's the reason.
Right.
Look at EPA rules, they say you go back to the state agency. And if they say you can stop, because I think after 18 months, if the state agency say you can stop, then you can stop. Most of your systems large here?
No.
No, they're small. Any other questions?